So, the hidden inner dimension of education is actually something that I find all really masterful teachers sort of get intuitively. Yeah, because teaching isn't just about what it seems to be about. Maybe Suhail is going to be talking to us in these days a bit about his causal layered analysis. But basically, reality has many different layers, and it's more than just what appears to be on the surface. So if teaching, and many people when they approach teacher training are looking for methodologies, how do I do this, how do I do that? And teachers tend to be quite practical people. They want to know not just theory, but how to implement it. However, teaching is so much more than what you can just explain through things like methodologies. It has a lot to do with the presence of the teacher and with the inner love that the teacher is projecting towards whoever he or she is working with. Yeah, teaching is connection. Teaching is communication. And so it starts from within. I remember when we first started talking with Kathleen, and we had Didi Anandajaya with us in a kind of working group to consult with her for this book that has just come out, The Becoming One with the World. And you had said, I can teach teachers many things, but I cannot teach them how to be kind. They have to kind of have certain type of kindness and goodness inside, and then I can really work with them, And if you look back on your own life as a learner, think about which subjects you really loved. And isn't it true that usually there was some special teacher? There was some special person? And is it so much that you remember what they said, or is it how they made you feel? Yeah? I had an extraordinary experience when I was about 12 years old. I had been growing up in Louisiana in the US, and it was notoriously not well known for a great school system. So my parents had put me into a Catholic school, but I was bored to tears. Like I was just spending the time reading my Nancy Drew books below below the desk. The teacher couldn't see me, so I'm like reading my Nancy Drew books and sort of like every now and then tuning in. And somehow I was able to like make A's, but I was bored. Like I didn't feel I was learning. I remember that at one point, this was actually much younger, when I learned to read at 7 years old, I just told my mother, I know how to read now. I can teach myself the rest. I don't want to go to school. And she was like, you have to go to school. And we were both crying. I was crying because I really didn't want to go to school. And my mother was crying because she felt she had to make me go to school. And I think she didn't want to make me go to school. She didn't know about unschooling. Like Kathleen here, she did. I think I would have been a great candidate for that. I was very, self-motivated learner. I was hungry to learn. I was curious. My mother wrote an essay about me when I was 7 or 8 years old, and she said, she's the only 7-year-old I know that wants Skylab to fall in our yard so she can look at it herself. Because Skylab was orbiting, and at that point we were living in Washington, D.C., and she took me all the time to the Smithsonian Museum, and I was absolutely fascinated with the moon rock, to touch this rock that had been on the moon. And there it is, and I can touch it. And I would go they had the Sky Lab, and it was so fascinating. I was completely enamored with this idea, these Skylab and all of these ideas, and I wanted to learn about it directly. So I think I would have been a good candidate for unschooling, but my mom didn't know about that. She's trying to be a good mom and respect her, we called her the blue ribbon citizen. She's the type of person who would always respect the speed limit even when nobody was looking, so she's she follows the rules, and I had to go to school. But when I got this teacher, when I was 12 years old, my teachers had identified me as precocious or something. Anyway, I got put into what they call a GT program, no, gifted and talented. And I got the opportunity. No, at the Catholic school, my teachers saw this and they recommended to my parents that I get tested into a special program. And so I got the chance to go to a school that was a magnet school, and it was a special school. And there I had an extraordinary teacher who didn't have us sit in rows. You know, she sat in a rocking chair, and her name was Mrs. Rabin, and I still remember her to this day. And she taught us through experiential learning. Now, she had us learn by doing. You know, I still remember she put us into two groups, and we had to debate the Israeli-Palestinian crisis at that point. You know, she put us into two groups. We had to debate both sides of it. She had us write books of poetry and then learn how to put them and assemble them together in a book. So it wasn't only the writing part, it was also how to make a book. And we acted out all kinds of things. And so I remember so many scenes from that, and I was only with her for 1 year, you know, and then we moved, as usual. My family was always moving. But that year really stayed with me, and she made me feel, thank you. Can you hear better? Yes. All right. I felt such a deep connection with her as well. And I was realizing, it was only a few years ago that I realized, why do I have such a strong, passionate, and intuitive feeling for holistic education? And I traced it back to this. I was like, it was because of that 1 year. Because after that 1 year, my family moved to Pennsylvania into a very good school district. And suddenly, I was not the smartest kid in the room. You know, and I had to work hard to get grades. And this was like very stressful because I never had to work hard to get grades, but now I did. It was a very competitive school system. All my friends were Asian, I had a lot of Jewish friends, and these two cultures put a strong accent on academic achievement, and the kids were just brilliant. I don't know, I had really smart colleagues in school. So it was a humbling experience for my ego, but I was now back in the formal school system in much more traditional type of setting. It was also a very good school system, so I was learning and I was engaged. But still, that 1 year just stood out like a beacon in my mind. And I realized that it was from that experience that I have this feeling and this passion for, you know, experiential learning and holistic learning. And in fact, I was sharing that with my mom, and she said, you know, why don't we look for her? And one of the reasons I never got away with anything in high school was because my mother was like Sherlock Holmes. But she puts these skills to a good use, and she did some internet searching, and within like less than a day, she'd found her phone number. And I actually contacted her. And I said, I don't know if you remember me. But I thought she might, because she moved to Pennsylvania after we did, and we went to her house and visited with her again. So I jogged her memory a little bit, who I was, and she remembered me. And I told her what I'm doing now, and she was like, wow, you know, and we learned so much more. We really know what works in learning now. You know, but it's just so difficult to get systems to change. You know, the public school secular systems are so resistant to change. Anyway, my point was, she was a masterful teacher. And what I think she got was this inner dimension of learning also is the connection between the teacher and the student, and really having yourself a sincere curiosity to learn. Is Serena in the room? Is she here? My teacher, Serena? No?
I think she's not the right.
Okay, anyway, then she won't be embarrassed that I'm talking about her. But when you go to a museum with Serena, and we're like here in Romania in the they call it Museu Antipa, right? The Museum of Natural History. And there's like a display of rocks. And she's like, wow, look at this rock, you know? And she just becomes like a small child, and her whole face lights up, and her whole, she's just transmitting enthusiasm and passion for discovery, and she just loves, and you can see the kids become so excited, because it's actually, you would think, kind of a boring thing for small kids to go and look at a bunch of rocks. But she makes it interesting, and so that's that inner dimension of the teaching, is the transmission of love and passion for learning, curiosity, and also just simply the presence of the teacher that is able to create a feeling that you are special, recognized, you belong, you are in a community, and you are seen. Because the teacher that loves you, that's what really brings out your own confidence. And often, if you think back to your subjects that you like, was there a special teacher? Can you pinpoint? How many of you can pinpoint like a special person that inspired that love of learning for you? Okay, yeah, so it really makes a difference, and even after years and years, and that's why I think also it was nice to reconnect with that teacher, because I think all of you also know, isn't it nice when you have a student that comes back after many, 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 many years and tells you, you made a difference in my life, and well, look what I'm doing now. Arun was telling us about all of these students that come back who are now in their 30s and 40s and are sharing that I am like this, and I have this success in my life because of the experiences I had in your school. So this is this inner dimension of teaching I want to look at. And also, what does it mean to bring spirituality into education when we're living in a very secular world? And is this possible to do in a way that is truly universalistic? So I want to share with you, this is a picture from when I was called to Lebanon a few years ago to do teacher training. And as you can see, it was a really big group. We were at least 50, 60 teachers. And what was unique about the challenge of this particular training was that we had present people that were from different sects of Islam. We had also people that were Christian, Druze, yogis, atheist, secular, agnostic. Like, it was really a full spectrum. And and not just like casually religious. Like, we had some of the women that were attending, now this was COVID, so they have masks, but some people were, sheikh and sheikhas, and they were like, they're covering they wouldn't take off their veil, they wouldn't eat when there were males present because they're not allowed to uncover their faces. So, it was people who are very deeply into their belief systems too. So I really was thinking how to, because usually, okay, I'm going to go give a new humanist training and talk about how we do circle time and quiet time. And for sure, we are dealing with refugee kids, and we know that these things can help build their resiliency. But I'm trying to think, what is the, culturally sensitive and appropriate way to do this? It's obvious that especially when I'm wearing the full costume, represents something. Once I was here in Romania and I was visiting a monastery, and the monks, I was only wearing an orange sari, only the sari part, and the nuns, there was this nun, the Maica Stărață, that's called, it means like the head abbess of the monastery. And she was a lovely, charismatic, wonderful person. And when I arrived with Didi and Nandaragamaya, we were both wearing saris, and they saw us from a distance. They came and greeted us and welcomed us and insisted that we eat, of course, and they had just collected honey from their bees and gave us bread with, this fresh honey that was just collected from the bees. They were so hospitable, and they're like, so tell us, what's with this orange? We could see you coming from a distance, and we know it was something different. So this is like definitely, helps us not to remain so anonymous. And then they were challenging us, why aren't you wearing black like us? And but in a very joking and loving way, and and they were singing songs for us, asked us to sing for them, and we had a really nice connection. And in fact, whenever I have guests, I take them there to go visit that monastery, and they're so delighted to have us there. So Yeah, I like building these bridges. I always feel a connection actually with other people who have committed their lives to God, in different ways. Whenever I see somebody wearing something like, some type of costume, I'm like, I feel like they're my brother or sister on a similar path. But, so when I was here, I was thinking how to do this. And I realized I was reflecting a lot on liberation of intellect, because for me, this is the book that Sri P.R. Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar gave that is really the seminal work of our neo-humanist movement, the liberation of intellect. And in that book, in many other places, he is writing with a different name, Sri Sri Anandamurti, as a spiritual teacher. And there he presents lots and lots of different ways and models of looking at our growth, our development, the human mind, using the yogic paradigms. Yeah, and he takes old existing frameworks like Astanga yoga or layers of the mind, and he revives them and adds new information to them. However, in liberation of the intellect itself, he doesn't use any of those yogic terminologies, and he doesn't even refer to a cosmic entity using particularly yogic terms. What instead he is referring to is sentiment. Right? The whole book is an analysis of different sentiments, and he arrives at devotional sentiment as the inner asset. He just calls it inner asset. It means the inner treasure of human beings. Yes? And this inner treasure is the capacity to feel love for something, for the greater self. Yeah? To feel that sense of connection and belonging, and to feel sheltered within something far greater than our small sense of self. And this is a subjective experience. So what I realized is that if we're going to try and present something, and we need to all agree on what that entity or experience, how to define it, what word, what terminology to use, this is where we're going to get stuck. Yeah? Because there's a lot of emotion attached to the various names and terminologies that are used to, because they usually represent a whole cosmological system. But where it is easier to find common ground, when you're wanting to find common ground across diversity, is the subjective side, because it's experiential. It's not about a belief system. It's about a feeling. Yeah, and this feeling has been recorded in every tradition. And if you look at the experiences of Christian saints, of Islamic saints, any type of the sadhus, all of these people, when you look at the descriptions of their experiences, you find so much in common. Experiences of luminosity, of like radiance, of effulgent light. They are everywhere, from Moses and the burning bush, to the Pentecost, where the Christians were experiencing, luminosity as tongues of fire above their head, like in the Sahasrara chakra for yogis. And they were experiencing omniscience, to speak in tongues, like omniscient consciousness. Yeah, so divine consciousness. Hildegard von Bingen is also a Christian nun, and she was referring to God as the living light. Yeah? And in our Prabhat Sangeet, often it's talking about effulgence. No, you came to me as light. Yeah, so this experience of the inner spiritual radiance, you find it in every tradition. Again and again, these references. So the mystics, the people who have personal experience of connection, usually are speaking a similar language. Yet where we get differences and caught up is in how then cultures, because a lot of what becomes religion has a lot to do with culture and history and a particular sense of place and belonging and community. But if you go to the core, we can find things we agree on. And so I used this approach when I came into the room that day with all these different people in Lebanon, and it worked. We were able to talk about different sentiments and also the dangers of the sentiments, but we were also talk about what connects us and that ability that not only that we have that potential, but how do we nurture it? How do we help it to develop? Because a lot of spiritual development, I think that the secularism has been a great gift for the development of humanity and humanism, because secularism allowed for toleration, right? Before that, when church and state were one, and still in places that exists, but in many societies where it's moved towards a more open society, one of the key things is the freedom of religious expression and the ability to have a pluralistic society in which many different faiths can coexist with respect. Now, this respect has taken the form of like, okay, you have your truth and I have my truth, right? And so that's a kind of like relativism. Every truth is true somehow, yeah? But I think that's not quite satisfying because it doesn't really give us a way to talk about things that are real and that exist and that are an important part of human development and an important part of satisfaction in human life. That in order to become a truly fully developed, satisfied human being, and I think that Arun was making this point very nicely yesterday, that you have to, it's not just about becoming an employee, but who are we? Like this kind of self-discovery, this lifelong journey of self-discovery, to facilitate that, can we do that in education? Can we do that not only, okay, you can do whatever you want in your private school, but can we also, if a movement like neo-humanism wants to make an impact in the world, can it make an impact only with one school in one country? Yeah? We have to find ways to be able to help ideas to be taken on in diluted form. They're not going to be the same way you can do it if you have your own private school, can do whatever you want. But if we want to have systemic change, then we have to find ways to communicate about these things that are inclusive and that make sense and that can speak to the secular paradigm. So I like this metaphor of kind of like if we are all trees in a forest, but our roots are intertwined. We're drawing on the similar source. Each tree has its expression, but somehow the roots are all tapping into one deep source of water. Yeah? You can dig wells in different parts of the garden, but they all will have the same source of water. Okay, so I already covered this, the subjective approach to find common ground. And I find now there's a lot of interesting emerging neurobiology and science that is starting to more and more give us ways to speak effectively in secular materialistic paradigm. Because I think to come out of a story, you were talking about creating a new cosmic story, and that there are other ways of knowing than just the materialistic scientific paradigm. But somehow I think we have to create a bridge. Now, there's going to be a bridge to go from one story to a new story. And that bridge is already being formed. There are different types of researchers that are looking into the neurobiology of spirituality and resiliency. One of them, I became aware of this through Krishna Sevananda, who's been working a lot with this, Lisa Miller, and her work on the awakened brain. What you're looking at here are some MRI scans. And what they found was that they were looking at a longitudinal study. I think it was over 35 years, actually. And one of the questions that she was looking, there's been a lot of research into the neurobiology and pathways of depression. But she was looking, is there also what would we see? Can we see? Is there any neurological evidence to show what's going on in the brain for people who identify as having higher spirituality? Now, the question, I think, was not just if you're identifying as like going to church or something like this, like going like religious, but if you had a sense of personal connection or meaning, to spirituality. So this kind of more personal spirituality was showing up in the MRIs in a very statistically significant way. She said it took their breath away when they looked at the MRI results because they were so clear and they were demonstrating something they hadn't expected, which was that the brains of the people who were identifying as high spiritual, having high spirituality, were showing significant cortical thickening and significant brain activation. They call it the awakened brain. That's why she gave the name to the book, The Awakened Brain, because you see more red areas that are showing increased blood flow, cortical thickening. All of these things are also related to, for those of us who are getting a bit older, prevention of Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's and cognitive decline is related to cortical thinning. And so spirituality, and this is not necessarily meditation. Meditation also is significantly highly correlated with cortical thickening and with increasing the areas of the brain that are related to connection, to well-being, to ecstasy, etc. So we're starting to see some types of evidence that can speak to this paradigm also, that spirituality is an inherent part of our well-being, you know, and how do we then integrate this into education? We also have some research that's emerging out of our own, from our own movement. This is from Richard Maxwell and Sucharit. They are colleagues of ours in the New Humanist Movement, and they are producing peer-reviewed research papers, and this was the first one that they published, I think maybe, was it 2 years, in 2022, characteristics of Kundalini-related sensory, motor, and affective experiences during tantric yogic meditation. A lot of the literature right now on meditation is on Buddhist meditation, mindfulness, and in fact you'll find that in the field of like yoga and meditation, you know, yoga has become identified with asanas and physical practice, and the monopoly on the public conception of meditation is mindfulness. Yeah? And anyway, I'm very grateful for that, because they have been able to successfully present a more secularized and acceptable version of meditation a bit, you know, again, to make that kind of like allergy to anything too spiritual in the materialistic paradigm. But they've been able to get in, you know, a lot of evidence and things that have made it a lot more socially acceptable, and you find more and more doctors and people meditating, and that meditation's become more of a household word, or at least mindfulness has become. And this is a good thing. I think it's kind of opening up a pathway, yeah? It's helping it to become more part of our lives. What they did here, though, was to try and create a body of evidence also for other types of experiences that are recorded in yogic literature, but to see if there could be a way to also quantify this. And it is subjective. It's based on interviews. So how do you call it? It's based on reflective interviews with people. The data is coming from that, where they're self-reporting their experiences. So he took like 80 meditators from retreats, and all practicing. The thing that he felt interesting from a scientific point of view is that when you usually do research on meditation, you don't know exactly what people are doing with their minds. And so then it's hard to create a controlled experiment. But in the tradition of Anandamarga meditation, there's a very specific process of meditation that everybody is following step by step. Yeah, and that allows for the research to be more precise. So he created this way, they have quantified some of the sensations and somatic symptoms and different things that people self-report, and found that they correlated also with traditional reports of Kundalini. So it's kind of trying to find evidence for yogic things that exist in the yogic literature, but translating them into ways that other paradigms can accept. And I find also very fascinating, have you heard of the endocannabinoids? Yes? Endocannabinoids are certain, these are neurotransmitters, and there's one that's actually got the name anandamide. Anandamide. Do you know what ananda means? I think you know. It means bliss, right? So, and it means exactly what it sounds like it means. It's the bliss molecule. It's the molecule that they've identified that is one of the endocannabinoids, which is active at the CB1 receptor, and THC also hooks up to that same site. So, you know, but it's endo. It means it's produced inside of your body. It's not something you need to take externally. It's something that your own body produces. And we have these receptors in our brain, not because we're all meant to smoke weed, but because our body is designed to produce blissful chemicals from within. And so this is related to bliss, ecstasy, elevated well-being. And of course, it is stimulated by meditation. Yeah, it's one of the things. It's also what runners experience as runner's high. Have you heard of that? You know, when people do intense exercise, they also get a feeling of well-being and bliss, and that's the same anandamide active. So again, we're finding, you know, more and more there's this research into how these things are innate in our biochemistry. The fact that this even exists, because one thing I find very annoying is evolutionary biology, because evolutionary biology is a story which sounds scientific in it, so it sort of presents itself as the only story. But evolutionary biology presents a story that the only way that we evolve is things that make us reproduce more. You know, that everything is only about reproduction and things that encourage reproduction. Now, this is coming out of Darwin and so forth, and it was true up until a certain point. Yeah, human beings do evolve, you know, like other creatures, according to what promotes the survival of the species, until you start to get rationality, decision-making, ethics, and other types of variables that have a lot more impact than just only the purely instinctual drives. Because why would such a chemical exist? It does, you know, why do we have these receptors in our brains for certain experiences that absolutely have no value for increasing our reproductivity? And in fact, if you think about it, the people who cultivated it the most tend to renounce. Yeah, they tend to get so absorbed in the bliss that can be produced within, they're not interested in having babies. So it does not propagate the species. It does not help to be, you know, but still we have these potentials in our brain. So I think it's a very interesting argument to challenge a bit that paradigm, is to challenge that that's a little bit of a weak link, because the existence of this very sophisticated, you know, whole neurobiological machinery that we have for bliss and transcendence and ecstasy does not get explained. That it made you sexier, you know, that it made you more reproductive. Not necessarily at all. Yeah.
I wonder if other primates have this.
That's a good question, and I don't know enough about it to answer. But if this molecule is present in other entities as well. Okay. Whoops. Back. I went too fast. Okay, so I would like to think that, you know, just as many of us working in education, we talk about child development and developmental stages and so forth. So is there also developmental stages of spirituality, or how can we look at spirituality as something that, just like if you're looking at child development, it's useful to know about the potentials of the child, because then you can support it. You're not making development happen. Development happens. Right? But you're facilitating, and you can optimize. And if certain things get skipped, they don't get developed well. You know, certain potentials a child has, if they don't get stimulated properly at the right moment, the right developmental window, they might have developmental delays. They might have difficulty in their development. So what about spirituality? It's so sensitive, it's so delicate. So how can we support the development of spirituality as something that's inherent to our human experience? Can we bring this into the discourse on development and how we support children, especially considering all the benefits that people that do have high spirituality in terms of their brain development and neurodevelopment have. So this is then an argument again of why, you know, spirituality, if we take it out of just a religious context, but how can we talk about it as our inherent search for meaningfulness? And how can we support that? Now, there are models, you know, that have touched upon it. And Maslow, for example, you know, he has the idea of self-actualization, but he puts it in this hierarchy as if you need to first, it's only a luxury. It's a luxury that you can afford once everything else is okay. I want to show you, oh, it's not letting me do it from here. Let's see. Oh no, it got closed. Okay, never mind. I'm not going to search for it then. I wanted to show you a video clip that I had when I went to Haiti, and immediately after the earthquake. It really made such an impression on me. The earthquake had just happened, and people were walking like this. And they were saying, Jesus, and they were calling out to God. Yeah, and they're just walking with their hands up like this, completely in that first moment of shock and trauma, and the first reflex, and many of them was this posture and this kind of calling out, to God. So it isn't a luxury. That's a moment when all security has been destroyed, right? It's not following that kind of hierarchy. Now, I'm not saying this doesn't have validity, but it's not so, rigid like that. So this need for meaning, for transcendence, especially in moments of crisis, trauma, suffering, is one of the things that gives people strength, is their connection to something greater than themselves in those types of moments. And it's one of the aspects of post-traumatic growth that Marilyn and I are also working on. So this idea, I want to ask you a question. After an earthquake like that, people all exposed to the same experience, what percentage of people do you think are going to remain with PTSD, with trauma? What do you think? Can I hear some guesses?
10%.
Huh?
10%.
What else? 80%, 90%, 90%.
35.
She's just going to guess. Throw in a 35. Let's see what happens. Okay. So many people think that if you've been through a traumatizing event, you are going to remain with trauma, like PTSD. Now, of course, there is the normal reaction to an abnormal event. Yeah, and within that realm of like normal responses to something abnormal, like an earthquake or a bombing or whatever it is, real threat to life and safety and all of this, you're going to have symptoms for a few months, maybe up to a couple months. But most people are going to recover. It's only 10 to 20% of people that will remain with PTSD, exposed to the same trauma. And that's without any specialized intervention. Yeah? Means I didn't go to a psychologist or anything. What is one of the key factors of resiliency? Can you guess?
Connection to God.
Not only,
Faith.
Community.
Faith.
community. It's actually social connections, adequate social connections. If human beings are able to hug each other, listen to each other, support each other, give good quality, the people who are in the 10 and 20% tend to have vulnerability, more vulnerability, because they're already in dysfunctional systems. Alcoholism, maybe different types of illnesses that make them more vulnerable. Yeah, so actually human beings have a great reserve of resiliency if it's supported well. And somebody else said connection, spirituality. That's, besides social connection is your deeper connection, so that is also a big resiliency factor, is if there is a spiritual. We saw that in Ukraine when we went in right after the war. Our emergency psychologist conducted a study in Chernivtsi of people that had been displaced. And she found in that study that many of the people were reporting that one of the consequences was that they were finding an increased connection to their spiritual tradition. Yeah, they were finding comfort and hope and in reconnecting or with their religious roots, which was mostly Christian Orthodox in Ukraine. Yeah, so you see this increase in that. And that I've checked out when I've been working with refugees, and many people will say, yes, I have more of a sense of connection to, the awareness of a guiding, protecting, presence with me. So spirituality is also a big source of resiliency. I found there is also, Fowler has done stages of spiritual development. Are some of you familiar with this? With Fowler's stages of spiritual development? So I will be looking more into this because I only recently became aware of it last night. I was like, wait a minute, maybe somebody's already done this. Let me check it out. Oh, yes. Huh? Yes, and Ken Wilber is another one that has really looked at development of spirituality. Yeah, I actually wanted to include him as well. So Thank you for mentioning that. But this is going, this again is kind of going through it like things do not necessarily emerge in this order or in, as it's described here, but it's very interesting to look at. It's talking about how it goes from attachment as your first foundation, which I think is true because I've seen that when I've worked with kids that didn't have attachment experiences, what happens is that they have a really hard time connecting to the idea of love, and especially a universal love, because there's deep down a sense of, I wasn't worthy to be loved, so there's a lack there, which is hard to fill up later in life because it happened pre-verbally. Yeah, so that foundation is really helpful when there is good attachment and love and experience of your needs being met, that kind of unconditional, that lays the foundation for spirituality. And then you have fantasy-filled, imitative phase. They're influenced by stories and examples of faith. School age, child begins to take on stories, action, examples of faith as belonging to a community. And adolescence, they begin to recognize stories, actions, examples of faith, and those outside of the family, internalized faith. Early adulthood, faith as an identity, personal responsibility, religion, social justice become important. And then adult thinker recognizes multiple perspectives, paradoxes, can hold more than one at a time. And quite rare, universalizing faith. I like that word, which is a non-dualistic approach to life, sees oneself as part of the whole, regardless of nationality, social class, gender, age, race, etc. Yeah, interesting. So, we are on a journey. And also, again, coming back to the seminal work of neo-humanism, Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar, he has many, there's so many teachings that he gives on different stages that have big Sanskrit words, attached. But I'm just going to look at a very simple model, very, very simple model that he gives in Liberation of the Intellect, which, first of all, he talks about the development of proto-psycho-spirituality. I love it when he makes up big words, because you're like, what is proto actually? He sometimes makes up words to create more clarity because there isn't yet a term that's that precise. So psycho-spirituality is when he's talking about how the mind moving towards spirituality, when our mind starts to try to look for meaning through spirituality. So it's the mind can take us in any direction, but when the direction of the mind is moving us towards that search for meaning to connect to spirituality, that's psycho-spirituality, movement of mind towards spirituality. Proto is meaning before, and what he refers to, it's like a flickering flame. It isn't constant. Sometimes it's moving in that direction and sometimes it's not. And I think anybody who's sat to ever attempt meditation has experienced proto, the flickering of the mind. No, the mind flickers. It doesn't go constantly in one direction. It flickers. So this flickering, this kind of proto, this is that inner urge. There's something more. What am I looking for? I'm missing something. I want to feel something. Is this all there is to life? And it's emerging at some points and it's kind of fading in other moments, that kind of flickering interest and curiosity. That is the proto. And then the psycho-spirituality. So this is moving us towards spirituality. And there's another model of three he gives also in that same book, which is that it starts, so what's developing the proto, the flickering, is cultivation, to cultivate, to practice. Yeah, not just to believe or to think or to read. Maybe reading can be part of a practice. It is a practice. In Jamanyam, it's svadhyaya. Yeah, so like reading can be part of it, but it's also how do you actually start to practice and cultivate this flame and make it stronger. And then principle is when the spiritual principle, the main principle that he's giving in the Liberation of Intellect is the idea of sama samaja tattva, the principle of equality, right? Equality of all beings as coming from the same essence. So an essential sort of equality. And that starts out as a practice. You're starting to practice it. You try to identify, you don't maybe yet feel it completely, but you're trying to identify your mind with a sense of oneness. and it's flickering. Sometimes it's there, but it starts to internalize itself and become a principle. You know within yourself, if you have a question, like, oh, I don't really like that person. You know, you have some kind of reaction to somebody. Yeah, but the principle is inside of you, but I know there's goodness in them. So you're going to use that to help you overcome your bias, your prejudice, your resistance, your negativities, whatever it is. And then ultimately it starts moving even higher than that towards mission, which means something greater than you. Yeah, when you realize that you're only a small part, that the mission of the whole universe is moving us towards oneness. Yeah, the whole universe is trying to accomplish this. That's the whole journey and story of the cosmic story you're talking about, the story of evolution. It's an evolution of consciousness towards greater and greater connection and oneness and ability to experience love in more and more expanded ways. Yeah, and so this becomes not only a personal mission, but a sense of being a small part. Because for me, mission is the idea of being a small part of something greater than itself. It allows you to transcend the small self. And so this is also about the samasamaja tattva, about feeling that there's something greater than my personal happiness. The opposite is atma sukh tattva, which means only individualism. And we see right now our culture is the cult of atma sukh tattva. It is the cult of individualistic pleasure as the main guiding principle of why, like, business is okay as long as it hits the bottom line, you know? It's like it has to be good for the business, and that's enough of a justification. It can be destroying the environment, but as long as it's making money, it's okay. Yeah, so this is like the individualistic mentality to the maximum right now, but emerging at the same time, because when you have a paradigm which is reaching its peak point, simultaneously you have another emerging one coming, that it's like antithesis. Yeah, so we have the emergence of the new humanist thinking. All right. And we are meaning-making creatures. What do you see? What do you see? You're laughing. Why? Why are you laughing? It's just some peppers that have been cut in half. It's just peppers. What do you see? How many of you see a face? Everybody, right? So we look at random patterns in nature and we make meaning out of them all the time, automatically. We can't even help it. We just automatically read into things. We interpret things. We create meaning. You know, these ancient people looking at the randomness of the stars, made meaning out of it, found elaborate meanings, whole systems of meaning. You know, the whole horoscope and all of this, it's incredible. So we have this elaborate capacity for making meaning. And Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar said, human life is an ideological flow, meaning it's a flow. Like we're flowing towards trying to always create more and more meaning, meaningfulness, connect ourselves to the sense of purpose and meaning. So this is an essential part of the human journey, is to address this. Where are we going? Why are we here? You know? And if education is only dealing with the more mundane aspects of life and not addressing these more existential questions, are we really helping children to develop their full potentiality? So how do we ask these questions? How do we bring these into the educational process? It's an interesting question. And this is the extroversial versus introversial learning. Yeah, so a lot of education has been extroversial, but we also need to develop the capacities and the skills that are required to introvert the learning, to explore the inner space. So I'd like you now to have a moment to reflect with each other. I want you to think for a second, what experiences in your life, especially in your childhood, you are all kind of extraordinary people, to be honest. You're all here. Yeah? You're all extraordinary. You all have something that only a small percentage maybe of people develop, which is actively kind of that quest and that search. You've been developing it somehow. You've been looking at it in different ways in education and so forth. So you have this feeling. What nurtured that seed in you? What happened to you as a child? Reflect back. It might be not only good things, it might be also adverse experiences that brought it out. But I want you to think for a moment, What were those shaping experiences that helped nurture the seed of spirituality for you personally in your life? And can you identify that? So I'm going to give you a moment, and I'm going to give you a bell when your time is up, okay? So turn to each other and just discuss that. Make groups of 2 or 3. Okay, very lively discussions. Does anybody want to just pop out some words or something to share? I will share one of mine. So one of the things that helped, I think, develop my spirituality was my father. Well, we learned early, I liked spending time with my father, but the only way to spend time with my father was to do something he liked to do. And he loved to fish. So I told you we were living in Louisiana, and there's these swamps, with trees growing out of the water and this hanging moss. And he was a very determined person. He had that first secret of success down. And he would go to this lake every weekend, and he even put special motor on his boat, got sonar, and you could see the fish going under the boat, beep, beep, beep. And he never caught one fish in that lake. But he never gave up. So, when we would go fishing, you cannot talk because you might scare away the fish. So basically, and I think actually my dad was meant to be a meditator, but he just couldn't, sit without having some kind of objective. So the objective was to kill something. But anyway, the end result was we spent a lot of time in silence together. And I think that silence is actually something that we have forgotten is important. The role of boredom. I find these days, the minute a child starts to get bored, they're given a device, right? To fill up the space. And they keep their minds constantly full, stimulated. But I actually think that there's a good argument for boredom. My kids in the children's home, I'm not always so popular because I made a rule, no devices until 16. And they constantly challenge me on this, why? But all the other kids have. These are kids already coming out of deprived situations. Of course because they want to materially be like the other kids, but they need to spend time, I think, in nature. They need to develop their creativity. And when they don't have devices, they're out playing. And I remember we went to the waterfall together with the kids, and they're just sitting there playing with the rocks and the leaves, and you were saying our Italian kids aren't like this. They're always with the phone, and our kids were just happily content to splash around in the water and play with the rocks and float leaves. And this is what happens when you don't fill up every space with information and with stuff. Giving the child a space to breathe, literally. Giving them a space to be able to discover and to introspect. I did have one of my most significant, perhaps, early childhood experiences of God and grace on that lake, because one night we'd gone fishing far out into the forest, and we were coming back, and suddenly it was more silent than usual. And I had just been staring at the water because it was like this pink with the reflection of the sunset, and very beautiful. But suddenly there was some quality to the silence, and I looked up and I'm like, look around, because the way you navigate is there's these little bits of license plate that have been nailed to the trees because they're reflective. And I didn't see any. And I was like, are we lost? And he doesn't answer. It turned out we were very lost. And there are no cell phones then. And that was the only time, that day when we were going out, that I knew the stories, but I hadn't actually seen them. I saw a little alligator, and I'd seen one of the cottonmouth snakes. They're a type of viper, and they hang from the hanging moss, and they drop into the boats at night. You do not want to spend a night on this lake. What happened was that I started repeating all the prayers that I knew, and I promised I would be nice to my brother. If we just can get off this lake. Very devotional. I really was serious. Like, I was really praying to God. And just as the last, all the pink had faded, and it was now becoming that gray before the light completely fades, and we found a license plate on a tree, and we got back home. So, but it really made an impression. So often, the devotional relationship can start out with fear. Moves from fearful love to fearless love. Anyway, I found that that's the silence, the spending time in nature, silence, once my uncle said to me, we were getting into the car, I was a small child, I was really upset because some game or some toy my brother had taken and I had nothing. It was going to be a 2-hour journey and I had nothing to do. And he said, "But you are a free spirit. You don't need anything." And I was like, "Yeah, I do." But anyway, I realized something that really stuck with me, that challenge of like, you're a free spirit. That idea of you are a free spirit, you don't need anything. Like, it was a challenge to my inner self that maybe he's right. Maybe I am. I wanted to be a free spirit. I felt he was a free spirit. This was my uncle, the Jesuit priest, who became one of the other things that really helped nurture my spirituality was growing up in a religion. I find that a lot of people are hesitant to impose any religion on their child. I actually think it's a really good thing to grow up in some kind of structured religion because it does create a base of feeling of connection to God. I'm grateful for that. I feel like it gave me stories, mythologies, like you were also talking that you had an important mythological story that touched you as a child, awakened that feeling of question mark of what is there. So I do think that helps, and I think that it's good not to be too shy about it. It doesn't, because children aren't at the age yet where they can choose at that age, and transmitting a lot of what happens, and in the neurobiological science is that spirituality is intergenerationally transmitted, and that the protective factor against depression is intergenerational. If there has been, for me it was my grandmother. I would go with my grandmother. She was always volunteering at the church and doing cooking and cleaning for the priests and making projects, crocheting blankets to raise money for the missions. And I was always tagging along with her, so when you have that type of relationship, and it's also intergenerational from grandparents to children and so forth, it gives a certain structure of verticality that's often missing in what Robert Bly called our sibling society, where the society becomes very horizontal and people are only looking at peers for reference. But when you do have this sense of verticality that does come from religion, so, I think that it can have a certain social and even spiritual benefit, and it gives you a base to work with. But of course, if it can only stay at a level of dogma or of like an external shell until you make it yours with your own personal search for meaning and truth. And that may take you outside of the tradition, or you might find it within the tradition, But the first person I told I was going to become a yogic nun was my grandmother. And you know what her response was? "I think if I was your age, I would do the same thing." She was so curious about yoga and meditation, and she said to me also that, "I wanted to be a nun too, but then I met your grandfather." So she gave me her blessing, yeah? I really felt I had her blessing. And I feel that's something very important to feel, that you have the social resources of people behind you. And this is one of those factors for resiliency, is the feeling of community and support and having people behind you. And I want to invite Vishala. Where did you go?
I'm right here.
Okay, there you are. She's worked with children in very adverse situations in a school system in a city where there's many kids that have complex traumatic backgrounds, and she's a school counselor there. And she does these wonderful systemic exercises. And now we're going to move into a bit practical stuff before I conclude. So one of the practical experiences I want her to guide you on is the feeling of that we do have resources around us, and how can we help to create that sense of connection. So
Thought you were going to do it, but that's okay.
oh no, I was asking, oh sorry, I didn't understand that part. Whoops.
Right on stage, this conference. Okay. So this is a very simple exercise that I've done with teachers and with students also, and you adjust it. If you do it with the teachers, then they figure out with whoever they're working with how to do it the right way for them and where they are and with their students. So I just invite everyone to just maybe put their feet on the ground, get in a really comfortable place. And maybe you can put your things down, there's no notes for this. And just take a few breaths. You can look forward at a spot in the wall. If you want to close your eyes, you can do that too. And just take a few breaths in and out. Breathing in and breathing out. Whatever's comfortable for you as you breathe in and you breathe out. And then just imagine yourself in a calm place for you, one that makes you feel safe and loved. Could be in nature, could be in a place in your house as you're breathing in and out. When I did this with fourth graders, one fourth grader imagined himself in the pool at school, the only place he knew under the water that was quiet. So where is that place for you? And then imagine who or what is coming in to support you in that calm place. Maybe it's someone behind you, a parent or aunt or grandmother, grandfather. Maybe it's an unknown ancestor in your country that you come from. But there's still, the essence of them is still there behind you, supporting you. And maybe there's something on the side of you, a friend or colleague. So you're breathing in and out. Who else shows up? Maybe it's a pet or nature or a tree. Maybe it's a spiritual teacher or your sense of a spiritual support or resource. And just take a moment to feel all that support, all those resources surrounding you. You might hear someone whisper something lovely in your ear. Filling your heart, filling filling wherever it needs to fill you up. Take it all in. And when you've had enough, which might be 3 hours from now, but when you feel like, okay, I'm keeping it, I have it, I'm remembering it maybe, you know. Come back, feel your feet, your hands. And you can open your eyes when you're ready. Yes. So one more step that you could do is draw a picture of what happened or write about what happened and keep that with you as a resource. Thank you.
This has created such a nice, quiet space. Yeah? So one of the things that really supports the spirituality, nurtures the growth, is creating space, creating quiet in the classroom. And it's the mind-body connection, that it can be one of the first steps is to be able to relax the body, relax the breathing, to invite the children to notice sensations in their body and around them. One thing is just called grounding, which is what she did when she said, feel your feet on the ground. So just like noticing the contact with the earth helps you to be present. And a lot of what is, creating agitation, fear, stress, it's either coming from the past or from the future, right? But not right here. So safety can be found here. And it's important to teach that skill. This is one of the skills of the introversial movement of the mind, is learning to ground, learning to be present, using the breath. I like this also. I saw it first from Vishala, and I stole it. But they're very nice. So breathing in, making the breath visible, making a smooth and quiet rhythm of breathing visible. And helping, when you harmonize a whole room and we breathe together in silence, this is creating a very profound, non-verbal sense of connection. So expanding the breath, releasing, and that's the first step, is working also on the somatic side, starting with the body, grounding it in a real experience. Because again, it's to start out with what our common ground is, our common humanity. And these things have all been proven to be, there's more language around self-regulation. If you want to access the higher potentials of the executive functioning of the brain, you first have to be self-regulated. And a lot of kids are dysregulated. And the environment itself has a very dysregulating influence. So working on this, bringing in this, when you do this, you're not only doing it for the classroom, you do it for yourself. When I teach circle time in our neo-humanist kindergartens, I remind them that your job is not to be quiet time police. You got your eyes open, close your eyes, shut your eyes, meditate. No, this is totally against the whole idea, Because the main thing is let go of what you think. Your job's not to control their mind. You have to be an example, right? You have to be able to be, how did you say, Kamaleshwar, a fare? No, it was you, like a fare. This is like the lighthouse. Even if the kids are agitated, they need that calm lighthouse to look to that's showing the way. So when you're able to stay calm and develop that presence, there's something called, spiritual presence. And I'm sure you've all had experiences of spiritual presence. When you're in the presence of someone that makes you feel deeply seen, deeply loved, deeply connected, right? And that is a real superpower of teaching. If you can generate spiritual presence as a teacher, then you will go from just being a teacher to being like really the masterful teacher. Because that's where the genius level of the teaching comes in, is with the ability to access spiritual presence. And how do you access spiritual presence? Is by practicing it. We have to embody it. And embody it means in our breathing, in our bodies, to be able to calm ourselves down, to be able to be that source of quietness and peace, and to transmit that through our vibration. And that is vibrational teaching, It's like you create a more powerful and subtle vibration, it helps to bring the other vibrations into that vibration. Yeah, the teacher's mind is creating like an umbrella. It's creating the big mind. The children, especially small ones, are inside of that mind. They feel your mind. You're creating the safety for them, the shelter. Yeah? And spirituality is about feeling yourself contained. There's a term called Ishvara Pranidhan, and it means seeking shelter within the controller. Yeah? So you're not in control. You feel there's a benevolence there, and you can let go, and you can feel yourself held. Yeah? Another thing that develops spiritual presence, and this also I like to call telepathic teaching, not literally like you're trying to transmit your thoughts to kids, but just the idea that you're teaching through your presence. The children feel your energy. They feel who you are, not just what you say. And so how do we develop that? How do we transmit that feeling in our teaching and prepare ourselves for that role? Last part was, the astronauts, when they went up into space, they say such mystical and beautiful things. If you just search it, like quotes from astronauts, the experiences that they have when they stand up above the Earth and they look at the whole planet. And I think if we're in New Humanism, we want to create this planetary consciousness to help children to just literally imagine it. So when I saw the Earth from space and all its ineffable beauty and fragility, did I realize that humankind's most urgent task is to cherish and preserve it for future generations. So it's going to be a while before we all can go up in space. Oh, I forgot my microphone, thank you. Whoa. Okay, what we can do, and this is also part of that creating, remember I told you that idea of you are a free spirit, the idea of like having the inner resource of your imagination. You need space to be able to access the creative imagination and the ability to generate a rich inner life. And how can we nurture that inner life is also through giving space for meaning making, for finding meaning through stories. You said your search for spirituality was through stories. I feel that's a very, very common thing, that we're looking for meaning and we construct meaning with stories, and stories help guide us. But also it's through being able to, and reading is something that helps develop the creative ability to visualize and to feel yourself inside of the story. Yeah? So I think also giving space to children to nurture creative visualizations, and ones that especially help to expand the mind and create that planetary consciousness. So one visualization that I think can help is just to encourage children to really imagine themselves seeing the whole planet. And how does it make you feel? And like nurturing that sense of gratitude, like just feeling yourself fill up with a feeling of gratitude for the planet as you just imagine yourself. You want to try it? So like we can start also, just tune in. There's also this idea of being able to tune out the noise. Even Steve Jobs, not exactly a spiritual teacher, but he did meditate. And he said, there's room to hear more subtle things. That's when your intuition starts to blossom and you start to see things more clearly. But I just was seeing a video the other day about signal and noise. And one of his secrets to success was his ability to tune out the noise and to stay on signal, right? This is, in yogic terms, pratyahara, the ability to tune out the noise, yeah, and to tune into what is important, and to keep your focus on the signal. You know, you could say the cosmic signal that's calling to us, and to be able to hear that and tune into it. And so this ability, that's why meditation can be so useful for kids, especially these days. I feel it's like a necessary life skill because there is so much noise. The environment we're living in, not just physically, but mentally, there's so much clutter, there's so much extra noise that it can be hard to discern the real signal, you know, and to tune into it, and to tune into what is really guiding you from within. And so we need to develop this ability to listen to the signal. And that's through being able to also get a sense of something bigger than the small self that is noisy. So to hear beyond the noise. I want you to try something extremely simple. First, ground yourself, feel your feet, you know, notice your breathing. And I just want you to tune in to the background noise, whatever you interpret that to be. Get a sense of background noise that's larger than yourself. Hear the space. Feel the space around you, and then let it expand. Feel the sky. It's always there. No matter where you are, sky is above you. Feel the shelter of the sky. And now imagine you're like an astronaut. Imagine you can look down on the whole planet Earth. And just imagine the Earth and get the feeling of home. This is home. All of the planet is my home. I belong here. This is our home. Let your heart fill with love for this beautiful blue planet shining in space and all that it contains. Okay. You can open your eyes when ready. So this is literally the practice of neo-humanist love, you know, to cultivate that awareness of connection, of home, of something much bigger than our small self. We have to keep that signal like a lighthouse in front of us, not lose it in all the noise of everything else. And so spirituality is something that needs regular cultivation before it becomes a principle and before we realize our connection to that mission that the whole universe is on. Okay, namaskar, thank you.